Hello, folks. Well, welcome the press here today. See, we're having a cabinet meeting, what we do during the cabinet meeting is we get a report out from our commissioners, folks from the Attorney General's office, get updates, and kind of set the direction for the next couple weeks. And we have these cabinet meetings periodically. I know we have folks on down in Juneau as well, and they're online. But before we get into the cabinet meeting, I just want to make a couple statements regarding our day-to-day operations and what's happening here in the state. So as we know, we've had a pretty good fire season this year. When I say pretty good, it's not good, it's just big. About 463 fires, about 1.5 million acres affected. And we have at least, I think it's at least 15, Commissioner, that we have folks fighting the fire?
We currently have 26 staff fires.
26 staff fires now. Okay.
As of this morning.
So because of the dry conditions and the heat, it's been quite the season. We also had HB 49 that was signed into law here several days ago. We are beginning to implement that process. We're looking at a $50 million fiscal note that's attached to it that will start to beef up our public safety, as we talked about during the campaign and in our State of the State speech with the legislature. Sport and commercial fishing are underway. In some parts of the state, we have got some pretty good runs. Folks are heavily engaged in that industry right now, correct, Commissioner?
Yeah, we have Bristol Bay is coming in above forecast. We have a few problem areas across the state, but no, overall we're doing really good in terms of returning an investment into the state.
Yeah, great. DOT, we got highway construction happening. This is obviously construction season. And so we continue to look at our different departments and see how we can become more efficient at running government, and not just to lower costs, but actually have better outcomes. And that's going to be the theme as we move forward, is how do we become more efficient by lowering costs, but again, get better outcomes than we may have had in the past. As we know, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail, the issue of vetoes has pretty much consumed the press over the last several days. And these vetoes, once again, in my opinion, were needed to start the process of right-sizing government. We're at a fork in the road for Alaska. And if you could for a moment use that analogy, it's as if the car is idling and deciding what side of the road it's going to go down or what fork it's going to go down. Last year, there was an attempt to go down the multiple tax fork and the continued spend fork and the take the PFD fork. The folks in the car didn't really want to go there. We're taking a different tack with a smaller budget, making sure that do everything we can to get a full PFD, and we'll see how that pans out. Certainly, it's been a very robust discussion in Alaska regarding the budget, where we want to go as a state, what do we value as a state, what do we want to pay for at the state level, what some folks may want to pay for at the local level, or what programs we may no longer wish to fund. So that's what this debate's all about. That's what this discussion is all about. The vetoes represent about 12% in reduction, and with about a $56 billion GDP or state GDP, that represents, these reductions represent somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% of that GDP. Conversely speaking, which sometimes doesn't get a lot of press, we're looking at an additional $5.5 billion in investment on the North Slope, private investment by investors in our oil industry. It's $5.5 billion this year, additional. When you compare that with the roughly $600 million in reductions, you can see there's a huge difference in what goes into the economy as opposed to what's been taken out. And I know that some folks have said that these vetoes will hurt the economy. Some have even used the term wreck the economy. I don't believe that, but I would, again, just have folks think about it in terms of balance. $5.5 billion going into the economy is quite the injection for the state of Alaska. And the purpose of the investment on the slope is to get more oil. So you get a double win for Alaska. We get this investment up front, which is going to create jobs, and our businesses will benefit from it. But also, we're anticipating upwards of 100,000 barrels here over the next couple of years, shortly coming online. This is going to add more revenue to the coffers. So this is all good news for the state of Alaska. For example, we're also looking at $2 to $3 billion in investment on top of what we just said in the PIC the Pika operation up on the slope, as well as $2 to $3 billion in the Willow operation up on the slope. So you can see the billions of dollars just in the oil industry are flowing into the state. So we also have a robust tourist industry that's been growing, in some cases exponentially over the last several years, and we anticipate another robust tourist season this year. Military construction up north in the neighborhood of $280 to $300 million continues, and our federal highway and transportation monies will be close to $1 billion as well. So this year alone, we're looking at $5, $6, $7 billion going into the economy in the state of Alaska. This is a tremendous investment that's going to pay dividends going out several years, as mentioned earlier, not just in better roads, but also in the oil output that's going to occur as a result of this investment. So we can talk a little bit about some of these vetoes. So the University of Alaska is taking main stage in the discussions, and understandably so. It's a large reduction. We have been in discussions with the university. We met with President Johnson on Friday. We plan on, my office plans on meeting with him again on Wednesday. We continue the discussions as to how we can help the University of Alaska become a leaner but also better university in terms of outputs, because once again it's efficiencies, but it's the outputs that we're looking for. As some may know, I'm a graduate of the University of Alaska. I have 2 daughters that attend the University of Alaska. I believe it is a valuable asset for the state of Alaska, for the people of Alaska. And so again, these discussions will continue as to how we can work together to realize the full potential of the University of Alaska in a smaller budgetary world. There's been discussions on the sweep and reverse sweep as it pertains to funds and the constitutional budget reserve. We put into the budget monies out of the general fund for things such as PCE and the scholarship program for individuals seeking higher education. Towards the end of the session, there was a decision made by the legislature to change those funds from GF to the CBR. But what happened was there was a failure to execute through a vote in the legislature the reverse sweep, as they call it. And so, as we stand right now, those items aren't funded. This is all part of a discussion that we're having with the legislature. We've been meeting with the legislative leaders. We've been talking with the legislative leaders for several days. We have another meeting here shortly with them. And we're all working hard. The legislature's working hard. Our office is working hard to come up with some solutions so we can close this session, finally close this session, and bring closure to some of these issues that we've been talking about for some time. And again, I know there's going to be questions about will there be the possibility of money being put back into some of these programs. That's part of the discussion that the legislature is having and has approached us on. And there's been no firm decisions made in that area because, once again, we've got to make sure that as we move forward, we're going to have a budget that we can afford, that can be sustainable. But again, we are involved in those discussions, and we continue to work with the legislature. And I'm always hopeful that we'll get a closeout here sooner than later. So with that, if there's any questions, Matt, you want to run this, because then we're going to get down to business with the cabinet.
So I know that the governor wanted to give both Commissioner Price and Commissioner Tangeman an opportunity to provide just a few remarks. So if we could turn it over to Commissioner Price real quick.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Amanda Price, Department of Public Safety. Governor Dunleavy has never wavered from the statement that public safety in Alaska is his primary priority. He spoke it every day on the campaign trail, and he has lived it every day while he's been in office. There have been some significant accomplishments since Governor Dunleavy took office to improve public safety for all of Alaska. As the governor indicated, the vetoes have without question dominated the conversation both in the public and in the media. To speak specifically to the vetoes as they pertain to the Department of Public Safety, there was just one, and actually there were three. There was one significant, and it was a $3 million veto in the Village Public Safety Officer program. While that is a veto in the program that provides public safety to rural communities, that funding has not been used by that program for years. There was simply no benefit to keeping the money in the fund to do exactly what it's done for the last several years, which is turn it back into the state. That does not improve public safety for our state. We have worked diligently and with specific and measurable outcomes to strip away the barriers to the programs who employ village public safety officers, and I believe what we have accomplished will increase the number of VPSOs that we have in our state. For some perspective, in FY19 there was $2.9 billion that was taken as a negative supplemental from the VPSO program. In addition to that, the program will still lapse funds. So the veto, simply, it's disingenuous to reflect that the veto is not supporting public safety. We are taking a lot of action on improving public safety in all of our communities. Some of the highlights of that include $400,000 additional dollars that have been pushed out to 26 emergency shelter programs in this state. That's a $400,000 increase over what has been pushed out to those shelter programs in prior years. Additionally, we have record numbers of Alaska State Troopers and Alaska Wildlife Troopers that have been hired. We already see the benefit of that, having graduated 17 from the Spring Academy. We are entering 18 into the Fall Academy. We've already extended job offers to 4 for 2020 Spring Academy, and we have a lateral academy in January. We're hoping for 10. This will be the first year that every single job PCN for the Alaska State Troopers and Alaska Wildlife Troopers has been filled. That is no easy feat, it's no easy task, and no other governor has been able to accomplish it in many, many years. So those are just some of the great things that have been underway. Thank you, Governor, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Governor. Bruce Tangeman. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue. Obviously, the economy has been a big topic of discussion with the vetoes, but we need to keep things in perspective and look back over the last couple of years, exactly what's happened in this state, what's happened around the United States. The lower 48 went through a recession not that long ago, but they climbed their way out of it. And what we saw, our competing states, when it comes to oil investment at least, we saw them react to the crash in the oil price, and they balanced their budgets for the most part. They followed suit. We in Alaska, unfortunately, pretended to a certain degree that we were not in a recession. And I say that because our CBR went from over 15 billion now down to less than 2 billion. So we were spending from our savings account as if not accepting the fact that we were in a recession. During this time, we saw the private sector react significantly, and it's been painful for the state, but we saw over 12,000 jobs lost in this state. I'll go out on a limb and say a small number of that 12,000 was actually state employment. We're seeing that we need to react now. This governor understands that we cannot continue to spend from savings, and we need to right-size government and accept the fact that we were in a recession and act accordingly. The potential for this state is mind-boggling. Once we get our state on the right economic path, as the governor said, the $5.5 billion is our forecast amount of investment for the North Slope alone. Above and beyond that is the $2 to $3 billion in new developments at Willow and Pika. Kieran Wolf, the president of Oil Search, was just on the podium here a couple weeks ago, and they're anticipating bringing that development on early in 2022 at a stepped up approach, but that's new oil to the state. That's $2 to $3 billion that the private sector is going to be investing in our state because we have a stable tax regime and they see the tremendous resource potential that we have. That's just 2 examples. There's many more out there that will help us get through this in the next decade. But until we get our budget in order, we will not be able to adapt and use these resources accordingly. This isn't about us. This is about the next generation and the generation after. We're still the envy of many states. The fact that we do have so many monetary and natural resources. if we put government in the right spot and we put a attractive investment climate on the table, we'll see that investment continue to grow in this state.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to open it up for a few questions of the governor. And we have our first question here.
I have a question. Governor Dunleavy, since the vetoes were announced, I don't know if you've spoken directly to people in communities who are feeling very concerned about the effect of these vetoes on their lives. What do you have to say to people in Alaska, and what have you been hearing from Alaskans about these vetoes directly to your office?
No, very good question. So I have been hearing from Alaskans, and I've actually engaged in Alaskans. I was up in Eielson Air Force Base this weekend for the air show and talked to a number of Alaskans. A number of Alaskans are concerned, obviously. I mean, I spoke with some folks that were attending the University of Alaska. They're wondering what that's going to look like. I explained to them that we're in conversations with the university, but the university also has a role in deciding what its university is going to look like under a smaller budgetary scenario. And so, of course, people are concerned. There's no doubt it's a large reduction of approximately $600 million. I've also had a lot of people saying, we understand that this needs to happen. I've had folks that attend the university. As mentioned, I have two daughters that attend the university. I was a graduate. But I have folks that attend the university that also believe that there could be efficiencies rendered from the university, that there could be a change in the duplication of services and programs. I think the president even recognizes this, and I believe that the regents recognize this as well. And so, it's not an easy situation, and it's not something I take any joy in. But again, as the Commissioner of Revenue mentioned, we've gone through billions of dollars in savings waiting on that fork of the road for a decision to be made. We have less than $2 billion left in the CBR. If we keep spending at the rate we're spending at, that will be gone. And the only thing we really have left after this point is the earnings reserve of the permanent fund. So some tough decisions have to be made. Previous administration looked at multiple taxes and taking the PFD. In the meantime, as they were doing that, our CBR was diminished. So no, I understand that it's difficult. It's difficult for a lot of Alaskans.
Okay. Daniela?
Governor, former Attorney General Donna Lindemuth has called your budget vetoes unconstitutional. She's arguing that they violate Article 7, which outlines the state's obligation to promote public health and provide for public welfare. In what ways does your budget fulfill those constitutional mandates?
So, well, first of all, the Constitution is what guides me in this process. The Constitution, the framers of the Constitution embedded in the Constitution and had a robust discussion on the concept of the executive being able to veto. So I find it difficult to believe that you would have a constitutional amendment or a constitutional tool for the governor on the veto side of things, and the idea that when you veto, it's unconstitutional. There is not necessarily agreement with the former Attorney General from a number of lawyers and constitutional scholars that I've talked to, including our own AG and folks in our department. So obviously there's going to be disagreement there. But we are funding our schools. We are maintaining our transportation systems. Yes, there have been reductions. We are working on our natural resources and fulfilling that obligation. So it's smaller. And smaller, I don't think necessarily means unconstitutional, because if that were the case, 15, 20 years ago, if we didn't have the funding in those programs that we have today, some would argue that that was constitutional back then. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, we're trying to right-size this ship and get it pointed in the right direction. We mentioned all the investment that is coming to Alaska. We're hoping this is a temporary issue, that once we close this gap, we're going to have revenue to fund the programs that we want, and down the road grow some of these programs that we need for Alaska. But I disagree with the idea that this is unconstitutional.
Elwood?
Governor Elwood Bramer with the Alaska Journal of Commerce. You mentioned positives in the oil industry, a lot of investment going to happen on the slope this winter. But maybe you've heard from them. I haven't heard from any other business industry leaders or groups that support the kind of reductions you put into the budget. Obviously you've had a big open for business mantra. How do those jive?
Well, we are open for business. We're talking about government, and there are a number of folks in businesses that benefit from government. It's just the way it is. But I would say that I've had a lot of businesses come to me. They may not be on the record, but they've come to me and they said, we've had to do this over the past 5 years. We've had to reduce over the past 5 years. A lot of large outfits have come in and said, we've laid off hundreds and some even larger amounts of individuals. So there are businesses that understand that when you're trying to close a gap and you're blowing through your savings, you've got to make some decisions. They understand that. And we've had businesses in discussions with folks that are looking at potentially investing up here. They get it. They understand that if you don't have the revenue, if you don't have the resource, you've got to downsize. This is what businesses do. So yes, you may be talking to some businesses, and yes, I've seen some of those businesses write editorials or comments. I would imagine that many of those businesses, if they were hit with the same situation that Alaska was, would be downsizing as well and trying to get through this situation.
We got a lot to get through, so I'm going to move on to Derek. Sorry about that, Elwood.
Talking about cuts to homeless services, how it impacts Anchorage. Brother Francis having to cut back its services significantly. How do you justify those cuts?
Well, Brother Francis is located in Anchorage, which is a city, it's a municipality. There are ways for the city of Anchorage to raise revenues too, to deal with items that are city-specific. I had a conversation with a city official several days ago, and they were concerned about these reductions. And I asked the city official, have you given any thought to raising revenue within your own community? That conversation at that time for the individual was a non-starter. Nonetheless, we have a lot of things that are done within municipalities that the state pays for, so you're almost acting in the capacity of both a governor, in some respects a mayor. This is different than a lot of states across the country, in which the cities and the counties in the lower 48 pick up some of the services that are specific to those cities or counties. We're looking at a statewide educational system. That's a state responsibility. Transportation system, that's a state responsibility. Management of our natural resources all over the state, that's a state responsibility. But there are some things, such as the item that you mentioned, that cities can help with, but also folks giving can help as well.
Jeff?
Governor, recently I learned that Tariq Ailes was let go from his job at the Department of Labor. He was the chair of the Independent Expenditure Group that you elected. Do you know about that, and do you know why he was let go?
I'm not aware of that, Jeff.
We can follow up with you on
That's
that
the
one,
first time I'm hearing it.
So Wes?
So you vetoed amounts for the state to reimburse local municipalities to pay back for deferred maintenance. But you also campaigned on no new taxes for constituents. If municipalities are going to have to increase property taxes to counterbalance that, how does that not translate to a new tax for homeowners?
It may translate into a new tax at the local level. In my campaign, we were referring to statewide income taxes. Statewide taxes is what I was referring to. But some of these items and some of these services, as was mentioned earlier, if municipalities may have to pick them up.
Okay. One point that's interesting, we've seen reactions from a lot of communities across the state, obviously, and some have, their first remark was, we need to sharpen our pencils on the budget. And some communities are saying the first thing we need to do is raise property taxes, raise taxes. So there's two ways for local municipalities to also deal with this. They have to address it through their own budgets, which consist of an expenditure column and a revenue column. And I found it quite interesting that the first reaction from some communities was, we need to look at our budget. And some communities was, we need to increase revenue. So that's something that communities are going to have to deal with in the coming year as well.
Okay, so we have a couple reporters on the line that we're going to try to get to. I'm going to just call on a few that I know are on there. James Brooks.
Hey, Governor. James Brooks from the ADN. Wanted to ask your reaction to the proposal that was unveiled today in the House Finance Committee, House Bill 2001, and the revisions to that.
I haven't had a time to dive into it. I'm sure my staff has, and we'll be having a discussion about that action today, hopefully in the next hour or so.
Okay.
Could you then speak more broadly about your negotiations with the legislature? What have those been like?
We've had positive discussions with legislative leadership on in both the House and the Senate, both in the minority and majorities, and so we continue those discussions. We'll be having discussions here later on. today. And again, the whole idea is to try and bring all the parties together to come up with some agreement on the outstanding issues, and hopefully we'll have something to report out sooner than later. We all realize that we're running out of time, and we all want a closure to this legislative session. We all want what's best for Alaska. We have different ideas on how to get there, but I feel strongly that we're moving closer together, and I'm pretty optimistic.
Okay, Steve Quinn on the line.
Governor, thank you. Last month you were asked about compromise, and you said that could be akin to capitulation. Now that we're farther along and closer to some deadlines, where does compromise play right now in your mind, with either the dividend or restoring some funding of the vetoes?
Those are discussions that we're having, Steve. I, like the others involved in these discussions, realize that we all have to come together, which means some movement into the middle so that we can meet. We're working through some of these issues, and again, in order for there to be agreement, there's going to have to be some give and take. We all realize that. We're working through that process now, and we'll see what the end product is. Once again, all we can do as a governor and legislative leadership is discuss the ideas, discuss the framework, but they have to go back to their caucuses, and then the full legislature needs to vote on whatever comes out of these discussions. But again, we'll know more after the next couple days. But again, I'm optimistic that we're going to get a resolution sooner than later.
Okay, I think Andrew Kitcheman, are you on the line?
Yes, Governor Andrew Kitcheman, Alaska Public Media and KTOO. The legislature is still separated in two different places. Do you have any thoughts on resolving that geographic split?
Yeah, it would be better if they were in one place. We made the call in Wasilla, again, for two reasons. One was after 150 some days, things didn't seem to be working in one locale, but also by bringing it up on the road system where about 500,000 people potentially had access or could drive to that locale in Wasilla. We were hoping that we might get a different outcome. Again, we'll keep working through that and doing everything we can to bring parties together to come up with a resolution. And I'm sure that'll be a topic of discussion over the next couple days.
Do we have any other reporters on the line?
Yes, Greg Knight, KINY News of the North.
Go ahead, Greg.
Governor, what are your thoughts on the movement that's going on in Anchorage right now to institute a recall election against you? And given that the organizers of that effort are just now beginning that process, are you concerned at all?
Well, I think whenever you make difficult decisions and people are involved, such as these vetoes, this is not necessarily a shock or surprising. I believe in public engagement. I believe that the people have a right to voice their opinion. There's a process for everything, including the idea of a recall. It's it's got criteria for that recall to be successful, and quite honestly, I don't think that my actions in following the Constitution when it comes to a veto process and trying to put together a budget that is going to be sustainable is going to end up being a grounds for recall. But people have the right to voice their opinion. People have the right to try and access various constitutional avenues to address their concerns. And so this is all part of politics. This is all part of being an elected official.
Okay. Are there any other reporters on the line?
Got to do a quick close.
Yep. All right, I'm going to turn it over for the governor to close out. Thank you.
We're focused on the legislative session, and we're focused on these vetoes, but Alaska is a heck of a lot more than this. This is an amazing state. This is a resilient state. This is a state with incredible resources. As was just mentioned, there was a time where we thought our oil industry was going to disappear within a few years. We're looking at over 100,000 barrels of new production here, hopefully within the next couple of years, and then more oil after that. There are more investors looking at Alaska. Not just in oil, but there are investors looking at a potential timber industry, our mining. Our location on the globe is of interest to folks, and our proximity to Asia, I think, bodes really well for Alaska. we get through this budgetary issue, I think we are going to be in great shape moving forward. We'll have a balanced budget as the goal here within the next year or two, and we'll still have our savings. We will hopefully have a full PFD for folks to be able to put that into the economy. That was a number we didn't mention, about $1.9 billion on top of the billions we just mentioned. All of that is going to help Alaska grow, is going to help Alaska become have a more robust private economy. And I think Alaska is poised to capture a lot more investment, create a lot more jobs, and I think Alaska's best days are ahead of it. And quite honestly, I'm excited about that. So I want to thank you folks for coming in today. Thank you very much.